Welcome back. This is XA. We would like to apologize for the technical glitch that we experienced. Otherwise, don't you fear. We're going to be playing the insert a little later on the show.
And as mentioned earlier on, we have Pathway to Free Education on our yellow couches today. This is a collective of students and non-students interested in bettering education in South Africa. Now, welcome to studio, everyone.
Thank you.
How
Thanks
are
for
you?
having us. We're good. How are you?
Good, and you? Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so free education has been trending for the past couple of years, right? So could you please just tell us a bit about your campaign?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, so Pathways to Free Education is a collective of students and workers and non-students as well. We've been involved. It arose out of the Fees Must Fall protest, as you would know, in 2015. So that's when we launched our first volume of published essays, interviews, etc., just to have debates around free education. So is it free education for all or for the poor? Who's going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from? But then to also hear perspective from high school students, from members of trade unions, from parents as to what they think free education is, what it means for them. So it was just to open up a space for more discussion and for more debate.
So with all of that discussed, I mean, I'm sure that it breaks down exactly what free education means. So can you please explain to us what exactly is free education?
Yeah. So I think the pamphlets, the collective, which then produced the pamphlets, all that we did is just create a space for people to write and to think with us around what they think free education is. There are different debates. Some people say it should be free education for all. Some say it should be free education for the poor. Some people say then who is poor and who is not? How do we measure that? Or how do you don't? Or what are the ways around measuring that? So we don't really have an answer, and we don't project an answer. We just project different views, and we try to basically bring different people around the table. Yeah.
And why do you guys believe that this topic is important, or why are you guys so passionate about it?
That's a very hard question. Well, I think it's also just locating ourselves as young people in 20 years post-democracy and trying to figure out. I think young people as like a social group or a social class just tend to always try to figure out what their role is. And for us, that was in some sense, 2015, Roads Must Fall, the discussion around decolonization, and then later on Fees Must Fall and the call for free education. So it's really just interrogating a lot of the inequality that we see, and then in particular what the role of education is. So it's in some sense trying to make sense of the position we occupy.
Speaking about roles, what do you think is the government's role in ensuring that people receive free education?
I think right now we're in a situation where the only sort of like organ that can organize the public purse is the state. So at this point, it's one of the situations where the government is, at least at this moment, sort of like this governing body in terms of like distributing funds. So in terms of free education, their role then is to ensure that that happens. How it happens, it can happen through taxes. Some people would say we need to tax the wealthy or the rich more. We need to move funds around, put out a different model out there. So I think that the government's duty comes in at precisely that moment of where do funds go? Do we build more institutions? What kind of institutions are we building? And what kind of education do we want besides just universities? Because it just doesn't end there.
Sorry to ask this, guys, but the question on everyone's mind is, do you guys believe that the quality of education would decrease if education was free?
Well, I think part of the one of the key driving cornerstones of the demand for free education is to also decommodify education, right?
Yes.
So the quality argument is often linked with this idea that you can measure the quality of something. So it's an economic argument that price is an indicator of quality. So for instance, UCT has got the most expensive fees in the country, and that is also linked with good quality, whereas if you go to Walter Sisulu, UKZN, etc., they have lower fees, and that's often linked to poorer quality. But the fees in themselves don't reflect, the level of teaching, the level of the curriculum that is being taught, etc. So I think as students, we think that we want to reimagine how we determine the value or worth of education, other than the price tag, because we think that is an intrinsic harm in itself. So I think that's our response to that, is that we need to find other valuation metrics
besides price.
Besides price.
Wow.
So local universities, as you mentioned, since 2015, strikes have become like an annual thing. You know what I mean? So going forward, what would you say to students?
I think, I mean, you can come in also, but I think for me, the thing is, we're at a point where students need to organize. And by organizing, I mean, we have an entire population of people. The struggle for education is not just a university struggle, but they're also high school students and they're primary school students and their parents, and they're different members of society who don't really understand the intricacies of what we're fighting for. So I think there's a huge mandate on the students now to actually sort of like work around the education of educating people about what they want and about what free education is, and organize around that, you know, mass mobilizing.
And as an organization, you guys work closely with young people. So what other campaigns are you involved in, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, so we as a collective, we're sort of like based on just volunteering.
Okay.
So we have different people. We have a Facebook page called Pathways to Free Education. Basically, anyone can join. I mean, you guys can join. Literally anyone, a grandmother, anyone can say, hey, I want to help out here in terms of like, I want to interview a person in my community who's a teacher, who's been working with young people, and she thinks this and this and this. So that's how it works. It's not like a formal organization. It's very loose. There's a WhatsApp group of people who come in and out who are interested on working on this and that.
Okay,
So,
wow.
Okay, so how long did this collective start, and has it had impact since its beginning?
You can
So-
talk about Uganda.
We began in 2015. I'd just like to quickly answer the impact question quickly.
Yeah.
So recently, not recently, in March, there was the first Vice Chancellor open lecture being given at UCT, and I was watching the recording last night, and I was actually surprised to learn that she referenced an interview that we did with a farm worker from Citrusdale talking about land occupation. So it's ironic that when you do some of the work, you're not sure if it has impact, but it actually does. People actually do follow it. But in terms of like tangible things, I mean, I think it's always useful to create popular education spaces. That's what I think I would describe Pathways to Free Education as. It's creating a space where people can come and engage with the content. So we had the winter school actually this year. That was based off of the third volume of our booklet, of the pamphlet. And I think that went quite well. It was with community housing, again, linking those struggles so that, as Nombuso was saying, students need to bridge the gaps and the disconnect between universities and communities. So I think a lot of that, I think that was very impactful, but then also because, you know, you need mass support anyway. So you also need to lobby support from other vested interests beyond just university students. You also need to speak to parents and workers.
I mean, what you guys are doing is actually great, because I think there's just like an umbrella effect, and then there's other things that filter through at the bottom that you possibly deal with. So just briefly, where can we maybe meet for, is there a next meeting where people are invited to discuss these issues?
So I guess the next meeting could be if someone can just Facebook and say, hey, I would like to speak to you guys about A, B, and C. And one of us will read it, and then we'll tell others, guys, there's someone who wants to meet us, and we move from there.
There is actually also one thing, if I have time. So we're recently working with a community house. They want, in particular, they have this door-to-door campaign that they're very good at. So I think in the next week or two, we're going to be meeting with activists from there, and we're going to just be drawing up a survey, asking them questions around housing and how those issues are affecting them. So we're just going to be basically branching out and working with other organizations. That's like our next project.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the Yellow Cultures today.
Thank you
and
for
as for
having
you
us.
guys, we really hope that you've learned something. Make sure to not move, because after the break, we have so much more here on XA.